My name's Natalie Reyes. I am 31 years old, and I want to tell you about a Sunday dinner in Concord, North Carolina, that I have replayed in my mind every single day for the past 6 weeks. It was March 9th, Diane Whitfield's 61st birthday. The table was set the way she always sets it for occasions: cream-colored cloth napkins folded into triangles at each plate, the ceramic gravy boat that only comes out when she wants you to feel like a visitor rather than a member of the family. My daughter Cora, who had just turned 3 in October, was in her booster seat between Marcus and me, methodically dismantling a dinner roll with the focused intensity of someone performing surgery. Marcus's sister Brittany was across from me, her husband Jerome beside her. Gerald, my father-in-law, was at the head of the table, already on his second glass of sweet tea, talking about the condition of the driveway. The food was Gerald's smoked ribs, which he only makes for occasions, and the smell of them had filled the whole house when we walked in. Hickory smoke and brown sugar, and the kind of warmth that makes you want to believe everything is fine. Diane was talking. She had been talking for a few minutes about property values, about the neighborhood, about what they'd paid for the house in 1998 and what it was worth now, about the value of understanding what you have. She was facing Gerald when she said most of it. But her body, the angle of her shoulders, the precise direction of her voice, had been aimed toward me for the last 4 sentences. The way a spotlight turns, not suddenly, but deliberately, and once it finds you, you feel it everywhere. She said some people are raised to understand the value of things. She said others have to be taught it. Brittany had gone very still across from me. Jerome was studying his rib like it contained a message. Gerald cleared his throat and adjusted his sweet tea. And then Marcus set down his fork. That sound, the specific, small, deliberate sound of a fork touching a plate in a quiet room. I have heard that sound in my sleep since that Sunday. I looked at him. His face had gone to a place I had never quite seen it go before. Not angry, something cooler than angry. Resolved. He looked at his mother. He said 5 words. I'm going to tell you what those 5 words were. But first, I need to take you back to the beginning. Because those words were 5 years in the making, and you need to understand every one of those years to understand why they landed the way they did when they finally came. Before we go any further, if something about this story is already sitting in your chest, please like this video and subscribe. Only if it genuinely resonates with you. That is all I ask. And drop your location and your local time in the comments right now. I want to know where you are. I want to picture you sitting wherever you're sitting. You are not alone in this. I met Marcus Whitfield in April of 2018 at a backyard cookout in the Noda neighborhood of Charlotte. Our mutual friend Dija Simmons was having her annual spring cookout. 30 or so people, folding tables, a playlist someone kept hijacking to add more Kendrick Lamar. I was 25. I had recently moved from a too-small studio in Plaza Midwood into a slightly less small one-bedroom on the plaza, and I was in that particular phase of your mid-20s where you understand, for the first time, that you are going to be okay, but you're not yet sure what okay is going to look like. Marcus was standing near the grill in a blue polo shirt, holding a paper plate, in a heated and completely joyful argument with Deeja's boyfriend about whether the Carolina Panthers had any meaningful shot at the playoffs. He argued with his whole body, hands moving, eyebrows doing things, laughing at his own points mid-sentence. He was not the loudest person there, but he was the one I kept looking at. We talked for 3 hours. He was 27. He'd graduated from NC State with a finance degree and had been working as a financial analyst at Truist Financial in uptown Charlotte since he was 23. He'd grown up in Concord, about 30 minutes north of the city, the oldest child of Gerald and Diane Whitfield. He talked about his work with genuine enthusiasm. He actually liked spreadsheets, which I found both strange and endearing. He talked about his little sister Brittany, who was 23 and had just started her own freelance graphic design business, with this particular mix of pride and protectiveness that told me something real about who he was. I told him I was a physical therapy assistant at Novant Health on Blythe Boulevard, that I'd graduated from UNC Charlotte with a kinesiology degree 2 years earlier, that I was working toward my doctor of physical therapy through a part-time program at Belmont University, and that I studied most Thursday evenings at the Caribou Coffee on Providence Road while the rest of Charlotte was at happy hour. He said, "That sounds lonely," I said. "It is, but it'll be worth it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I believe that about you. I know that sounds like you put in a movie, but that is exactly what he said. And I felt it the way you feel something true. Not in your chest, but somewhere lower and quieter than that. We were together from that April. Not officially, not right away. We did the circling thing for about a month. Texts that ran until midnight, coffee that became dinner, dinner that became sitting in his car in a parking lot in South. End for 2 additional hours, because neither of us wanted to be the one to end it. We made it official in late May at a Hornets game we attended with 4 other people and spent mostly talking to each other. I need to tell you about where I came from, because it matters for everything that follows. My father, Carlos Reyes, died of a heart attack when I was 19 6 weeks into my sophomore year at UNCC. He was 60 years old. He and my mother had me and my brother Danny late in life. He had worked as a line supervisor at a printing company in Kannapolis for 23 years. He was not a man who talked much, but when he did, he said things that stayed. 2 weeks before he died, he sat across from me at our kitchen table in our house in Concord. Yes, Concord, the same city where Marcus grew up, the same city where Diane Whitfield lives, which is a coincidence that has never stopped feeling like something. And he told me that the only inheritance worth leaving was a work ethic. He said a reputation for excellence is a currency that never deflates. He died before I finished the semester. I went back to UNCC in January, and I did not miss another class. My mother, Rosa Reyes, has been a medical billing specialist at Atrium Health Presbyterian for 22 years. She is 57 years old, 5'2", and the most quietly formidable person I have ever been in the same room with. She raised me and Danny after my father died without ever letting us feel the full weight of what she was managing. We were not wealthy. We were never wealthy. But we had enough because Rosa Reyes made enough, and she made it with dignity and without drama and without asking anyone for anything. She could find another way to get herself. I say all of this so you understand. I did not arrive in Marcus Whitfield's life looking for someone to carry me. I had been carrying myself before I had a name for what that meant. His salary, his parents' paid-off house in Concord, the investment accounts his mother referenced at dinner twice before I had known her for a full year, none of that was what I wanted. What I wanted was the way he remembered small things I'd mentioned weeks earlier, the way he laughed, the way he handled difficulty by turning toward it rather than away from it. I want you to understand that about me, because the story I am about to tell you requires it. Marcus proposed on a Thursday evening in October of 2019. We had been together for 1.5 years. He took me to Assaggio, a small Italian restaurant on Selwyn Avenue, to the specific table in the back left corner where we'd had our third date. He cried a little when he opened the ring box, which made me cry immediately and without any ability to stop. I said yes before he finished the question. We called his parents from the parking lot. Gerald whooped. I heard it from the passenger seat. His voice came through the phone and absolutely filled the car, and I laughed out loud. Diane said, "Oh, Marcus, are you sure?" 4 words. I sat with those 4 words all the way home that night. I tried to arrange them into something innocent. Surprise, shock, the momentary flutter of a mother who hadn't expected the news. I almost got there. Almost. We drove to Concord the following Saturday to celebrate in person. I had met Diane and Gerald twice before, once at a 4th of July gathering at Gerald's brother's house in Cabarrus County, once at a birthday dinner for Brittany in August, both occasions with enough people present to dilute anything concentrated. Both times Diane had been pleasant to me, warm even. She had asked about my program at Belmont. She had complimented my hair. She had handed me things at the table before I asked. I had thought, this is going to be okay. That Saturday, just the six of us, plus Brittany's college roommate who appeared briefly and left as if she sensed something, was the first time I was fully in the room with Diane Whitfield without cover. She had made pulled pork sandwiches. The kitchen smelled like coleslaw and cornbread and something sweet in the oven, and Gerald kept wrapping an arm around my shoulder saying, "We're so glad, we're so glad," and Brittany pulled up. Pinterest boards of dresses she thought might work for bridesmaid gowns, and it was for a while exactly what it should have been. Diane smiled at Marcus across the kitchen island with a smile that said, "We will talk about this later. I saw it. I filed it. I chose not to act on the filing." The conversation I was not present for happened 6 days later. Brittany called me on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the break room at Novant Health, pouring my second coffee of the day. She told me she had been at the house and had overheard, not deliberately. She had been in the hallway, hadn't moved away fast enough. Her mother talking to Marcus in the kitchen. She told me Diane had expressed concerns, that she worried the relationship had moved faster than Marcus had realized. That she had said, and Brittany paused here, choosing her words, that women from certain backgrounds could sometimes confuse a man's generosity for a future. I set my coffee cup down on the break room counter. I set it down carefully, because if I hadn't, I would have put it through the wall. Certain backgrounds. I want you to sit with those two words. My father worked for 23 years in a print shop and died at the kitchen table at 60. My mother has been showing up to the same hospital for 22 years, so her children would never feel the full weight of what she was managing. Certain backgrounds. As if coming from working people were a stain. As if wanting Marcus, not his family's assets, not his salary, just him, this specific person, were a con she had the unique wisdom to detect. I told Marcus that night, exactly and completely, with no editorial softening. He was upset. I want to be fair to him, genuinely, visibly upset. He called his mother from the bedroom and they were on the phone for 42 minutes. When he came back to the couch, he said, "She says she didn't mean it like that. She says she's just protective of me." I asked, "What did you tell her?" He said, "I told her she needs to treat you with respect." I asked, "And she agreed." He said, "She says she does. If someone in your family, or your partner's family, ever made you feel like you had to prove your right to be in a relationship that was already yours, I want to hear about it in the comments." The feeling of being assessed before you have been known, of being found wanting by someone who hasn't taken the time to see you, is one of the most disorienting things a person can carry in a relationship that should feel like home. And I want you to know, if you have felt that, it is real, and it is not about you. I chose to believe Marcus had handled it. I was 26 and I was in love, and I wanted very badly for things to be okay. We got married the following June 2020. We'd pushed the original date back 4 months because of the pandemic and then decided we were doing it anyway. Smaller, 83 people, at a venue called The Estate at Coffee Creek outside Concord. My mother wore pale gold and cried during the vows in the specific way people cry when they're also fighting very hard not to. Marcus's grandmother, Nana Jean, 78, drove from Canopolis, held both my hands in the bridal suite before the ceremony and said, "Baby, I have been asking God for someone like you for this boy for years. I have never forgotten that." Not the words, not the way her hands felt, not the particular firmness with which she said it, like she had been holding it for a long time and was glad to finally give it away. Diane's toast at the reception was technically correct. She talked about Marcus's qualities. She talked about watching him grow up. She made one mention of me, at the very end, something about hoping we would build a good life together. She was looking at the centerpiece when she said my name. The first year of marriage was quiet. We had a 2-bedroom apartment in South End Camden Road, 7th floor, a narrow balcony that looked out over the city, and we built our life in it with the carefulness of two people who were doing something real. I completed my Doctor of Physical Therapy that December, 3.5 years of night classes and weekend intensives. studying at kitchen tables and break room counters and the back booths of restaurants while working 40 hours a week. The day the degree was confirmed, I drove to my mother's house in Concord and sat at her kitchen table and told her, and she put her face in her hands. Novant Health promoted me to full physical therapist. My salary moved from $49,000 to $71,000. I was 27 years old, and I had done that with my own hands and my own Thursday evenings and my own stubbornness about what I was going to be. Diane did not ask about the degree when it was Mark's told at Sunday dinner. She asked if he was eating enough, because he looked like he'd lost weight. I need to be precise about what the next 2 years looked like, because I think it is important to distinguish between cruelty and a particular kind of sustained, deniable, ambient erosion. Diane was never cruel to me, not directly. She did not call me names. She never raised her voice. She was, at every family gathering, what the outside world would have called perfectly civil. She offered me food. She sent holiday cards signed with both our names. She asked about my job with a neutrality so perfectly calibrated it could not be called hostile. But there was always a but. The comments came sideways. She would ask Marcus questions about whether he was getting enough rest, whether his stress levels seemed high, whether he was taking care of himself. Asked while standing at her kitchen stove with her back to both of us, addressed to the exhaust fan over the burner, so that I was somehow simultaneously the audience and not the audience. She would volunteer unprompted details about how she and Gerald had raised Marcus, what values they had instilled, what kind of environment had produced this man, as if the origin story of her son required regular public documentation at the dinner table. She would notice things in our apartment when she visited, the arrangement of the living room, the food in the refrigerator when she opened it for a glass of water. She would not comment directly. She would let her eyes rest on things for one beat too long and then move on. The message always landed. The plausible deniability was always intact. In February of 2021, I found out I was pregnant. We had been trying. It was planned and wanted and celebrated in our bathroom at 6:30 in the morning, with a test that Marcus held in both hands like it might dissolve. He kissed my forehead and said, "We did it," and I cried in that particular way you cry when something you've hoped for stops being a hope and becomes real. We told his family at Sunday dinner the following week. Gerald stood up from the table and pumped his fist. Brittany made a sound I can only describe as a pterodactyl noise, and came around the table to hug us both. Marcus laughed the way he laughs when he's completely, unceremoniously happy, big and open, not self-conscious at all. Diane stood up. She hugged Marcus first, long and close. Then she turned to me. She hugged me, and she said very quietly, lips close to my ear, "I hope this is what you both really wanted." I stepped back. I looked at her. She was already turning toward the kitchen, saying something about needing to check on the bread. I want you to understand the precise architecture of that sentence. Not congratulations. Not I'm so happy for you both. I hope this is what you both really wanted, said to me alone, not to us, to me. As if Marcus's desire for this child were the given, and mine were the variable that still required verification. As if the question of whether I had manufactured this moment was one she was still holding open. I stood at that table with Marcus's hand on my back, and I smiled and I said, "Thank you," because that was the only move available to me. Because there was no proof. There was never any proof. There was just the precise surgical delivery of doubt in language that left no fingerprints. Have you ever been painted as the villain in a story you didn't even know was being told about you? Have you ever found out that someone was constructing a version of you, in phone calls, in rooms you weren't in, to people you'd never meet, that you would not recognize as yourself? Tell me in the comments, because that is a specific kind of theft, and I want to name it out loud. I know about the phone call because Brittany told me. 2 weeks after we announced the pregnancy, Diane called her older sister Rosalind, 64, lives in Greensboro. Brittany had been at the house, And Diane had made the call from the kitchen while Brittany was in the living room. And Diane had not accounted for how far the carries in that house when the kitchen door is open. Diane told Rosalind that she had always worried about this, that she had tried to warn Marcus, that she suspected the pregnancy had not been an accident on my part, that she hoped the child would bring out the good in me, because she didn't know what else would. I was 17 weeks pregnant when Brittany told me this. I was in the parking lot of the Wholey Foods on Providence Road, grocery bags in the back seat, both hands on the steering wheel. I shook. Not cried, shook. The full-body kind that happens when something too toxic to process arrives all at once. 17 weeks pregnant. A doctorate in my name. A human being growing in my body. And my mother-in-law was on the phone with her sister calling me a predator. I told Marcus that night. This conversation was different. He was angry in a way I had not seen directed at his mother before. His voice went up. He called Diane that same evening, and the call came through the walls of our apartment. Not every word, but the shape of it was hard. It was real. He came back and sat on the edge of the bed and said, "I told her she owes you an apology, a real one." She called the next afternoon. She said, "Natalie, I'm sorry if anything I said came across the wrong way. I only ever want what's best for my son. I'm sorry if anything I said came across the wrong way. Not, I'm sorry for what I said. Not, I said something wrong and I want to name it." She made the apology passive. She directed it at her own intentions rather than at my experience, and she wrapped it in Marcus's name like a shield. And Marcus, I need to be honest here, because this part hurt me as much as anything Diane had done. Marcus accepted it. He told me that evening that his mother had called and apologized, and that he hoped we could move forward. He did not ask me whether the apology had been enough. He decided on our behalf that it was. That was the moment the hairline fracture in our marriage became visible to me. Our daughter Cora arrived on October 14th, 2021, at Atrium Health Carolina's Medical Center on Blythe Boulevard. 7 pounds, 2 ounces. She had Marcus's ears and my stubbornness and zero patience for being hungry, which she came by entirely honestly. She was, and remains, the finest thing I have ever been part of making. Diane came to the hospital the day after. She held Cora and she cried, real, unperformed tears, the tears of a grandmother who had just met someone she would love for the rest of her life. It cracked something open in me. For 6 weeks postpartum, I let myself believe that Cora had changed the equation, that holding a granddaughter had given Diane access to a love that didn't have to pass through judgment first. I was wrong. Not about her love for Cora. That was genuine and it was deep. But her love for Cora and her decency toward me were, for Diane, two entirely separate things that did not connect. By the time Cora was 4 months old, Diane had begun appearing at our apartment with no advance notice. 2, sometimes 3 times a week. Always with food, a casserole, a bag of groceries, a canter of soup, always when Marcus was at work. She was unfailingly pleasant. She got on the floor with Cora. She asked the right questions. But there was something beneath the visits that I eventually named, around the 8th or ninth one. She was auditing. Walking through my home and assessing my adequacy as a mother, my fitness as a wife, the caliber of the environment she had found her son living in. And doing something more deliberate, establishing herself as the central figure in Cora's small life, filling the space before I had a chance to fill it fully myself. I went back to work in January of 2022. Atrium Health had recruited me to a senior physical therapist position at Pineville Medical Center, $89,000 a year. We enrolled Cora at Little Sprouts on Rhea Road. Exceptional staff, excellent early childhood program, $1,750 a month. And we settled into the rhythm of 2 working parents and a baby who had inherited both our stubbornnesses. Diane offered to watch Cora instead of daycare. Marcus thought it was a wonderful idea. I said no. Clearly and without apology, with a reason attached. I want Cora to have a consistent daily environment and to socialize with other children from the beginning. Marcus accepted it. But I knew he told his mother, and I knew his mother filed it alongside everything else she had been filing. The word I would use for years 3 and 4 of our marriage is managed. Not broken. Not cold. Managed. Marcus and I loved each other with a real and present love. He was a good father, actively, genuinely, daily good in the way that actually means something. We still made each other laugh. We still chose each other at the end of the day. But there was this structure we had built, a careful architecture of avoidance around the subject of his mother. And we lived inside it the way you live inside any structure that keeps the weather out, gratefully, and without asking too many questions about how long it will hold. I had learned, by year 3, not to bring specific incidents to Marcus one by one. Each one followed the same arc. I raised it, he took it seriously, he called Diane. She produced a non-apology, he accepted it, the clock reset. And I was left feeling more isolated than before I had said anything, because the raising of it had created the appearance of resolution while changing nothing. So I stopped raising it. And Marcus had learned not to relay nonsense to me, because he could see what they did. And so we arrived at this particular silence together and called it peace, because the word for what it actually was harder to say. My best friend Jasmine Torres. We met freshman year at UNCC. She is now a registered nurse at Presbyterian. She is one of the 3 people I trust completely on this earth, had been watching all of it from the beginning. In March of 2023, she sat across from me at a small table at Custom Shop on Elizabeth Avenue, a restaurant we had been coming to for years, and she put her hand flat on the table and said, "Natalie, I need you to hear me. A man who loves you but does not protect you from his mother in the way you actually need is not giving you the full thing. And you have been performing okay for so long that I think you've started to believe your own performance." I looked at my food, she said. "I'm not telling you to leave. I'm telling to stop pretending." I thought about that conversation for 4 months. In June of 2023, I started seeing a therapist doctor. Pamela Hughes, licensed clinical counselor, office on Park Road in South Charlotte, $220 a session. I do not have a single regret about that money, doctor. Hughes spent the first 3 months not telling me what to do, which is, I have come to understand, the entire point. She spent those sessions helping me locate the difference between what I could actually control and what I had been exhausting myself trying to control, and helping me see why I had been doing the second thing as a substitute for the first. What I couldn't control, Diane's opinion of me. Whether she would ever arrive at a full, unqualified acceptance of who I was and what I brought to her son's life. Whether Marcus would, in some final and undeniable way, put himself fully between me and her. What I could control. How much of my energy I kept pouring into earning something I had deserved from the moment I walked through her door. Something changed in me after those sessions. Not a decision, exactly. More like a resolution. I stopped performing warmth for Diane that I didn't feel. I stopped arriving at Sunday dinner with extra kindness packed as armor. I stopped softening my refusals or wrapping my no in diplomatic packaging. I was polite. I was civil. I was a grown woman who had done nothing wrong, and I was done behaving as if I had. I noticed something when I stopped trying. Not a change in Diane. Diane remained Diane. But a change in what Marcus could see. I think the absence of my effort made the shape of the problem more visible. When I had been managing everything, it had looked like everything was fine. When I stopped managing, the fine went away, and what was underneath it was just there, for both of us to look at. In September of 2023, Marcus told me he had made an appointment with a therapist. He said it while we were washing dishes after Cora had gone to bed. Side by side at the sink, the kitchen quiet except for the water. He said a colleague had recommended someone, Dr. Aaron Reeves, an office on Sardis Road. He said he thought he needed to look at some things about his family that he'd been avoiding. I kept washing the dish in my hands. I said, "Good. When you have watched someone since you love turn toward the thing they have been turning away from for years, when they finally, quietly begin the work, what does that feel like? Is it relief? Is it grief? Is it both? Pressing against each other in the same moment without resolution? Tell me in the comments." because I have never found the right word for what I felt at that kitchen sink. It was relief, yes. And underneath the relief was something that ached, because of how long it had taken, and because of everything that had already been spent in the waiting. Marcus saw Dr. Reeves every other week from that September through the following spring. I don't know everything they covered. That was his process, and I respected it as his. What I observed were changes. Small, incremental, and definitive. He stopped delivering his mother's remarks to me with the neutral tone of a man reciting a weather report. He began occasionally to name the pattern when he saw it. That was pointed at you, I know that, rather than finding a way to explain it away. At Christmas 2023, when Diane made a comment about how nice it would be if Cora could spend more time with her grandparents, said to the Christmas tree, addressed to the middle distance, aimed squarely at me, Marcus said quietly without looking up from his plate, "Mom, we'll talk about scheduling when we need to talk about it." It was one sentence. Outside our marriage, it would have looked like nothing. To me, it felt like the first brick. The Sunday dinner was March 9th, 2024. We drove up to Concord in the early afternoon, Cora strapped in her car seat in the back, singing something that had been Wheels on the Bus at some point, and had since evolved into something entirely her own, a composition involving frogs and what I believe was a character she had invented named Biscuit. Marcus had the radio on low. We talked about Cora's new obsession with frogs at Little Sprouts, a work project he had wrapped up Friday, whether we should repaint the bedroom in the new house we had just bought in Dilworth. A $412,000 three-bedroom craftsman with 900 square feet of backyard and a kitchen window that looks out at the yard, where Cora has already established a domain, involving 2 plastic buckets and a set of plastic dinosaurs, the ordinary texture of a life. Gerald had smoked his ribs. The smell reached the driveway before we got to the door. Brittany and Jerome were already there, and Brittany came down the front steps and scooped Cora out of her car seat and spun her around while Cora shrieked with pure joy. Marcus carried in the strawberry birthday cake we'd brought from Harris Teeter. Gerald pumped Marcus's hand at the door and looked at me with warm eyes and said, "Good to see you, sweetheart." Dinner was fine for the first 40 minutes. Fine in the way Sunday dinners at the Whitfields had become fine. Everyone in their roles. The food excellent. The conversation navigating the soft spots with the expertise of people who had been doing this for years. Gerald talked about the driveway that needed work. Jerome told a story about his job at Atrium's facilities department that made everyone laugh. Cora ate 3 bites of cornbread and commenced an engineering project involving her macaroni. And then Diane started talking about money. It began as a comment about the neighborhood, about what the house was worth now versus what they'd paid in 1998, about real estate as an investment, about what it had taken to hold something valuable for 26 years. And then it turned, the way her monologues turned, on a slow and deliberate arc toward a point she had selected before she began. She said she thought about this often. About the difference between people who understood the value of what they had been given and people who didn't. About how some people were raised with that understanding and how others had to be taught it. About how she felt fortunate that her children had been raised to know the difference. She was looking at Gerald when she said it, but I could feel the direction of it the way you can feel a change in air pressure before rain. Her body had been angled toward me for the last 4 sentences, the way it always had been, that specific, deniable, practiced angle. Brittany was very still across from me. Jerome had become deeply interested in the crosshatch marks on his rib. Gerald cleared his throat. Cora was saying squishy, squishy, and pressing pieces of cornbread together with both thumbs, completely unbothered by the weather in the room. I did not respond. I had spent 2 years with Dr. Hughes learning that I did not have to utter every message aimed at me. I had my fork. I was fine. Marcus set down his fork. That sound, that specific quiet, deliberate sound. He set it down the way a person sets something down when they have made a decision they are not going to walk back. Not loudly, not dramatically, with a finality that the table heard before any of us had processed it. He looked at his mother, not at his plate, not at the centerpiece. At her directly, with a steadiness I had never seen him use in that kitchen. He said, "Mom, Natalie is the reason this family works." He paused then. "She works full-time. She raises our daughter. She comes to this table every Sunday, and she has given this family nothing but good. I don't know why that has never been enough for you. But I'm done watching it not be enough." The table was completely silent. I looked at him. His face was not unkind. It was finished, the way a person looks when they have carried something for a long time and have finally, quietly, set it down in the right place. Diane's face. I have thought about it more times than I can count. It was not the face of a woman who had been blindsided. There was something beneath the guarded rearrangement that followed. Just for a second, just below the surface, that looked almost like relief. Like some part of her had known this was coming for years and was in some way it didn't know how to admit, ready for it. Gerald said, "Marcus." Marcus said, "Dad." "I mean it." And then the room held its quiet for a long moment. When you have waited so long for something that you've stopped naming the wait, when it finally arrives, does it feel the way you imagined it would? Tell me. Because I had imagined it triumphant. I had imagined that particular expanding feeling in the chest that comes when justice shows up. Instead, I felt something quieter, something at the meeting point of relief and grief and exhaustion and love, all pressed together into a single unnamed feeling. I picked up my fork. I cut a piece of rib. I ate it. Gerald's ribs were perfect. The drive home was the most quiet I had felt in years. Not an empty quiet, a full one. Cora was asleep before we reached I-85. Marcus drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on my knee, and we did not talk until we were nearly back in Charlotte, the skyline appearing through the windshield. He said, "I should have said that a long time ago." She said, "Yeah." He said, "I'm sorry, Nat. I'm sorry if things came across the wrong way, not, I'm sorry you felt that way." Direct, owned, with no room for interpretation, the kind of apology that doesn't leave a back door. I put my hand over his on my knee. I said, "I know. We didn't go to Sunday dinner the following week." Diane called Marcus on Tuesday evening. What I know about that call is what he told me afterward, standing in the doorway of our bedroom while I folded laundry. She had asked if they could come for dinner. Just the four of them. The following Saturday, in the extended family. She had asked to have a conversation. I set down the shirt in my hands. "What do you want to do?" Marcus asked. I said, "I think she should call me, not you." "Me," he nodded. She called Thursday evening. I was at our kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold, and I let it ring 3 times before I answered. Diane Whitfield said things to me on that phone call that she had not said in 5 years of marriage. She said she had not been fair to me. She used that exact word, fair. She said she had been afraid from the beginning of losing her son, and that she had aimed that fear at me in ways that were wrong. She said she knew her previous apologies had not been real ones, and that she understood if I didn't trust this one yet. She didn't enumerate the specific incidents. She didn't name the phone call to Rosalind, or the auditing visits, or what she'd said into my ear the day we told the family about the pregnancy. But she said enough. And the pacing of it, slower than her usual register, each sentence chosen rather than flowing, told me she had written and rewritten this, had probably talked about it with someone. I said, "I appreciate you calling, Diane. I don't have anything to forgive yet, because we haven't actually talked about most of it, but I'm willing to." A pause that lasted several seconds. She said, "That's fair. We went for dinner that Saturday, just the four of us and Cora. Gerald's baked chicken, a baseball game low on the television in the background, because Gerald always needs something on to hold the room together. It was not comfortable. I want to be honest about that. It was 2 women who had been circling each other for 5 years. Finally in the same room without the stage dressing, there were silences. There were sentences one of us started and stopped. But there was also a moment when I asked about a photograph on the wall, Marcus and Brittany, as children, maybe 7 and 3 years old, at what looked like the North Carolina State Fair, both in matching red shirts, and Diane told me about that day, about how Marcus had eaten too much cotton candy and been carsick on the way home. She laughed. A real one, not performed. For a moment, she was just a woman telling a story about her kid, and I was just a woman listening to it, and there was nothing loaded between us. Cora knocked her sippy cup off the tray of her booster seat and announced, "Uh-oh," with great solemnity, and Diane picked it up without being asked and handed it back, and Cora looked at her, grandmother, and said, "Thank you, Nana," in that clear, serious 3-year-old voice. The room exhaled. Marcus and I began couples therapy in April with Dr. Claire Hensley, a practice on Queens Road in Charlotte. $45 per session through our Atrium health insurance plan. We go every 2 weeks. Not because our marriage was broken, but because we had spent 5 years building around a problem instead of through it, and we wanted to learn a different way to build. Brittany and I had coffee in May at Not Just Coffee on North Davidson. She cried a little. She said she was sorry she hadn't done more, sooner. I told her the truth. I had never needed her to fight my battles. I had needed her to keep being honest with me, and she had done exactly that every single time. She had been the only person in that family who reliably told me what was being said in the rooms I wasn't in, and I will never stop being grateful for that. The boundary Marcus and I set with Diane is not a list of rules on a refrigerator. It is simply this: what I say stands. My no is a no. My decision does not get routed through Marcus for processing. When I tell Diane something, it is said. It is not a negotiating position to be revisited through an intermediary. She has, for the most part, held to this. There have been 2 small moments since March where the old pattern started to reassert. Both times Marcus caught it before I had to. Both times he handled it himself. That is the only thing I ever needed. Not a different mother-in-law, not a perfect family, not 5 years returned to me. Just my husband, in front of me, standing where he should have been standing from the beginning. It's a Tuesday in August. Cora is at Little Sprouts. Marcus is at work. I'm sitting at our kitchen table in Dilworth. The Craftsman House, 900 square feet of backyard. The kitchen window I loved from the moment we walked through the door. The morning light comes through that window right now, at an angle that is exactly the color of early fall, which has been my favorite season since I was small. I think about the version of me in the Whole Foods parking lot at 17 weeks pregnant, shaking with something too large to process. The break room at Novant Health, the coffee I set down carefully. All the Sunday dinners I drove to with extra warmth packed as armor, and drove home from feeling hollowed out. All the energy I put into trying to earn something from a woman who had decided before I walked in her door that I wasn't going to earn it. I don't think about those years with bitterness anymore. Mostly with clarity. I was always the right person for Marcus. I knew that. He knew that. It just took time for the truth of it to become undeniable to everyone else. I am now a senior rehabilitation specialist at Atrium Health Pineville. I make $97,000 a year. I own a third of the equity in a house I love. I have a daughter who calls me Mama in a voice I would walk through any number of difficult Sunday dinners to hear. I have a husband who sat at a birthday dinner in March and set down his fork and said 5 words that rearranged the temperature of a room he had been slowly heating for 5 years. I don't need Diane Whitfield to have always been kind to me. I just need her to be different now. And most days, she is. Not perfect, different. And given how long I waited for different, that is enough. That is more than enough. If you see yourself in this story, if you have ever sat at a table where the welcome was conditional, where the love had a price attached, where someone looked at you like a problem they were managing instead of a person they were meeting, what would you have done? Would you have stayed? Would you have kept coming back to Sunday dinner and hoping something would finally crack open? Leave a comment and tell me, because your answer matters to me. And if you want more stories like this, the ones that take the long way around to something real, it's all in the description.